Hello, everyone. I'm so pleased to wish all of you a great morning, an amazing afternoon, or a fantastic evening from wherever in the world you're joining us from today. My name is Jamie Wenbesson, and I am a Senior Gender Program Manager at the International Union for Conservation of Nature. And on behalf of the amazing team here, all the co-organizers and partners, thank you so much for your time and your interest for joining us today. First, please note that today's webinar is being conducted in 2 languages. Next slide, please. Our opening and closing today will be in English, and many of our speakers will be presenting in Spanish. To facilitate a global discussion, we will have simultaneous translation for Spanish, English, and French today. To listen to the webinar in your preferred language, please download the Interactio application from the Apple or Google Play Store on your phone. When you open Interactio, you'll need to enter the event code as you see on the screen here, GBV-ENV. I recommend that listeners use headphones on a phone or another device, remembering to mute the sound of your computer so that you can hear the audio stream in your language of choice very clearly. You can also find all of these instructions in the handout section in the control panel on the side and in the webinar invitation in your emails. And if you have any questions, please do contact us via the chat box. We will be very, very happy to help you. Next slide, please. The next points of housekeeping relate to how today's event will be conducted. First, please be aware that the session is being recorded and it will be online in 3 languages soon. We will also keep microphones muted to minimize connectivity distractions, but we encourage you to actively participate via the chat box. Please share with us any comments, observations, or questions that we can factor into the speaker's discussion today. And again, if you have any technical issues with this platform or the translation application, please feel free to reach out to the team behind the control panels through the chat box, and we will be very happy to help you. It is also my pleasure to extend a very big thank you to the team behind the scenes, as well as our partner USAID, who makes the session possible. I also want to thank our colleagues at the Commission for Ecosystem Management for collaborating on today's event. Next slide. Before we continue, I do want to remind everyone that this session will discuss gender-based violence, which can be uncomfortable, upsetting, or triggering for some, and we please invite each and every one of you to please take care. Next slide. Now, today's event is part of the webinar series from the Gender-Based Violence and Environment Linkages Center, which is hosted by IUCN with the support and collaboration from USAID through our partnership on advancing gender in the environment, or as we like to call, AGENT. Today's session is also being hosted in collaboration with colleagues from IUCN's Commission on Ecosystem Management, and we're so pleased that they're here to join us today and contribute key reflections. The GBV-ENV Center works to close the knowledge gap on GBV and environment linkages while mobilizing learning, cooperation, and support to forge collaborative action towards ending GBV and securing a healthy and peaceful planet. The GBV-ENV Center is, of course, a strategic part of AGENT, where we work to fill information gaps, make the case to decision makers, and provide tailored technical assistance to help build a world where all environmental action advances gender equality. Next slide. The aims of today's webinar are simple. We want to share with you an enriching and promising experience that we have worked with many partners on in Central America on building positive masculinity to promote gender equality and improved biodiversity. Our incredible speakers today are going to share insights, tools, and hopefully inspire each and every one of you to take steps in your own areas of work. Next slide. First, it will be my pleasure to introduce you all to Jackie Siles, today's session moderator. We will then hear from Luis Ramos from USAID for opening remarks. We will then hear presentations from Zulma Mendoza, Luis Gonzalez, and Alberto Blanco about the Regional Coastal Biodiversity Project. We will then have a discussion among panelists before hearing closing remarks from Pamela McElwee. Next slide. And as a last matter of housekeeping today, we do have one quick poll question for you. Your answers here and also at the end of today's event are going to help us assess and how we can tailor future webinars. So thank you so much for taking a moment to help us share feedback. We just want to ask you first and foremost, and let me get this poll started. So thank you. We can start getting the inputs from you all, is to ask you how you would rate your current knowledge of why or how to address masculinities, gender-based violence, and biodiversity conservation linkages together. You'll see 5 selections here. You can select not knowledgeable, somewhat knowledgeable, knowledgeable and you know where to find practical information, very knowledgeable and you yourself are able to address these issues into your work areas, or that you are extremely knowledgeable and you yourself are a resource for others on how to do these things. So if I can give everyone a quick minute to respond to the poll, once we have a critical mass, we'll move on. All right, I see that the collection response is just starting to slow down. So we'll just give it a few more seconds for our remaining inputs. All right, let's go ahead and end the poll now. And thank you so much. And real quick, we'll just share with you the results of that poll. So it looks like we have a lot of learning to do together today, and we hope that this webinar will be very useful. Thank you. All right, so next slide. It is my pleasure to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Jackie Siles. Jackie Siles is a Costa Rican agricultural engineer with a master's degree in natural resources management with an emphasis on watershed management. She has led and coordinated environmental sector projects in the Mesoamerican region, Africa, and Asia that promote the sustainable use of resources and gender equity and equality, as well as the development of public policies, strategies, and environmental programs that include social and gender aspects. She is currently the gender specialist for IUCN's Human Rights in Conservation team, where she leads technical work to strengthen gender inclusion in initiatives related to issues such as climate change, biodiversity, energy, protected areas, marine and coastal zones, landscape restoration, among others. Jackie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone that are participating in this event on this webinar. We know that you are in very different areas in the world. For me, truly, it's a great pleasure to be here and moderating the section of today of this webinar. The workshop that we got for today will be presenting this wonderful process that we've had for a lot of years of collaborating together between the initiative of gender-based violence and agent, and also um, in and also the regional project of biodiversity. This process of technical support, we started this in 2019 and has been, well, adding up with all the good recommendation from the gender-based violence, because we elaborated this same year. This guide that you're seeing on the superior part of this slide, and also you will have a chance to see the document, the link to the document on the handout area from the webinar screen. And also we've been nourishing the link about gender-based violence, the link of, and also the environment one that we launched back in 2020. Today we will have the chance to know a little bit more how we've been taking and adding all these lessons learned of these both documents that you're seeing on your screen, and we've been strengthening it with both lessons learned, the incorporation of the gender-based violence in the implementation of a project on a sector of the environmental part, but as well we're also we have to evaluate how we are and where we are with this initiative on preventing and giving a response on gender-based violence. I don't want to take that much of a time, and we will continue with the agenda. And well, the next slide, please. Now we will listen a little bit about, well, we're gonna hear the words from our well, our opening remarks, Luis Ramos. He's the person that's gonna open our webinar of today. So yeah, Luis, he currently has a doctor in ecology in the University of Florida and a master's degree in in the state of New Mexico, but also he's a vet. He graduated from the National University of Mexico, and he's has more than 25 years of experience in environmental aspects. In the last what 10 years, Luis has been the manager of multiple projects focused in climate change and biodiversity for the international development area of USA. Luis, go ahead. Thank you very much, Jackie. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Hi. Thank you for your time and also your attention to talk about gender-based violence and also in the protection of environment and nature. I feel honored for this opportunity of presenting and introducing the discussion that we're going to be having about the topic that USAID is promoting for the Agency of the United States for International Development, USAID. Social inclusion and also reduction of vulnerable groups, and also by the diversity that they have access to resources, decision making, and also different right is definitely something of high importance. Particularly is that significant reduction of gender-based violence. I particularly believe that a lot of the violence comes from the same prevalent interpretation that society has about masculinity. And that is why I applaud and I truly appreciate all the extraordinary efforts that USM has done in biodiversity, that they act as leaders of promoting and that discussions between local leaders, men and women, on building masculinity and also recognize the dangers of machismo has with women and men in the area, right? It's very well known and it's very well documented that women has high participation in biodiversity conservation in the care of other environmental aspects, but they face a lot of resource in that participation in the decision making. In the worst case scenario, the gender-based violence focus on environmental aspect. Also, it's very well known that look for wood, water, and forest products and other natural products can also expose women and girls to gender-based violence. Just like an example, the regional project has definitely shown how women participate strongly and voluntarily in the restoration of forests in different parts of the business of fishing. A lot of the women go out fishing without having the correct equality participation in the region. So those results that are going to be shown, you will see pretty much it's just a response between a collaboration between many stakeholders. And I would like to mention all of them, but there are a lot that pretty much has an impact on local, just like UNES, for example. Luis will be with us in this representation, and also other consultants, especially those ones that know the thematic about masculinity, that will collaborate today, and also USCN through the implementation of the project, but also from the collaboration of the agent project that's being managed from Washington. That Jackie's the one that's representing it, and also from USA that through represented by the regional office for Central America and Mexico with headquarters in El Salvador and the gender office in DC. All of them, they've been participating in this process and they help us to work together in all the results that we are going to be exposing today. I hope that what we're going to show in the biodiversity and also webinars just like this ones, we have to analyze the topic, and also we need to reduce those gaps about the gender-based violence in a more equal form. I really hope you enjoyed this webinar. Thank you very much. I'm at your service and have a wonderful day. Thank you very much, Luis. Thank you very much for this wonderful words. And we will definitely start right now with our the three presentations that we have. The first presentation that we have is pretty much just to know the Regional Coastal Biodiversity Project and this work from gender-based violence. That's in charge of Sulma Mendoza. Sulma, currently, she's 25 years of experience implementing projects of biodiversity conservation, developing other alternative of local communities, and also biological corridors and other protected areas in the area of El Salvador and the region of El Salvador. Sulma has also been part of the consultor, part of the environmental VIS area as the rep of the Ministry of Tourism and Natural Resources. And also, she's also been pretty much, she started two organizations that are helping and assisting the biodiversity and wildlife. So, currently, as of right now, Sulma, she's the coordinator of the regional project of biodiversity, of coastal biodiversity, lead by USCIN, Sulma. So please, you can start your presentation whenever you want. Thank you very much, Jackie. Thank you very much for me. Definitely, it's great pleasure just to be with you here in this webinar and with the rest of the team in the name of the project and behalf of our colleagues and everyone that's joining us, especially the ones that have done, well, made this possible. All my colleagues in DC, including you, Jackie, that you pretty much helped, well, facilitate this webinar, right? I wouldn't have the chance, I wouldn't have the enough words just to appreciate, especially you, Jackie, the conduction and the leadership that you've done for our project since the beginning of the project. That pretty much was pretty much the first thing that we established, which pretty much is the gender-based policy. This is pretty much the main interest of the goal of the project, just like the places that we were going to establish, to we were going to work with the community, the local communities, with pretty much the local culture that pretty much they prevail, the men as well as the main character of all the decisions, just like the access of all the resources, and also the, well, the advantage, or the same exploitation at the time, right? Also, to wrap up this thankfulness, I just want to add and thank Luis Ramos, his in particular interest in this topic. That pretty much it's a person that is very interested a lot in gender equality and also social inclusion. Well, all of these elements have done, well, that has helped that this project is pretty much making this project quite successful in this topic. And the rest of the team from RCBP, the regional project of coastal regional biodiversity, we've learned, as a matter of fact, I include myself there, in, well, trying to go deep in the root causes of, well, that can make this place, well, create this impact that we want to change, this behavior of the region. Very good. Let's go to the next slide, please. Our project, well, initially it was programmed to be executed, let me see, to be executed for 5 years, and recently we added and amplified this for 2 more years. This gives us another chance, another good opportunity to continue going more deep, not only in this topic but also in other important topics. And we do the project, and this project is located in 3 countries, in specific places where they build some key ecosystem for the same biodiversity, and especially, well, the forest area that are quite very important, just like nutrition about the biodiversity. These areas are Rio Pan on the Pacific Central American area, together right next to Guatemala and El Salvador. The other place that we worked is pretty much both of them. They're located in the Caribbean of Central America. In Honduras, we have the River Motagua, pretty much where it's the borderline between Honduras and Guatemala. And at the end, and not less important, La Mosquitia from Honduras, where we worked in the area of, specifically areas on that area. Yes, being La Mosquitia, one of the biggest challenges that we have of this topic of, and where pretty much we've collected a lot of good experience and rich experience, how we've done in this project, performing it with so much success and with so much challenges. especially, well, our agency that's supporting us is USAID. Is pretty much the leader of the project, UICN, that they presented a proposal to USAID together with other key stakeholders to focus and address this amount of topics and the different goals that they need, that the project needs to fulfill. One of those members, it's a regional stakeholder, that's Gold International, and also in each of those places we selected an NGO, a member NGO of UICN, being and having social stakeholders, so that at the end of the day and at the end of the project, all of these results can be placed in the territory. Our project has natural defenders in the Caribbean of Guatemala, Arcas in the Pacific of Guatemala. We have Mopawi in Honduras, in La Mosquitia, right next to Nicaragua, and UNES in El Salvador. Now, the extension period will be, it's going until November 2022. Next slide, please. What are pretty much our goals is pretty much to reduce those challenges in those ecosystems that I already explained, not only to protect the nature, but also that this could mean some, well, life meaning for all the communities that are living here and future generations. Help the communities to protect and teach them how to manage biodiversity, and to add an added value that they can use for an economical growth through the biodiversity commerce, using a lot of strategies inside that we have, and consider the strategy of gender equality. We also have governance, we also have bio trade, and also the same communication, right? Next slide, please. What have we done with the strategy, with the gender strategy that we've done in the last few years? Well, the women were pretty much, they were not supported to their access to financial resources. So what we done is pretty much gave them a woman economic empowerment. We work so that they can empower from a leadership, that they can know and give a value to their own presence in the community. We've established some strategic alliances with other stakeholders and members that are not part of the group, but also some stakeholders that were going in throughout time, like CCO, for example, those conservation bodies of Omoa near the coast of Honduras and Sofromal, and other members just like FIAES, for example, that they have some alliances that pretty much, this is in El Salvador, and this, all of these alliances has helped us a lot to expand and also train all these institutions in this topic, create those capacities about the importance and the governance of the women in, well, fishing. We have pretty much groups of women that are working fishing and leading fishing. Thank you very much. Now let's go to the next slide, please. The next slide, please. We here have our impact. We have 17 organizations with more than 41% of women that are receiving grants of the small donation projects part. Five other organizations, women organizations, are exclusively receiving also this grants. More than 40% of the steering committees that have been built to address the communities in one way or another, the topics will now represent more than 40%. When we were working this when we started this was not the reality. So this is something new. It's a new reality for the area. 58% of the members of the board are directors. We're talking about the presidents. Now over here I'm talking the constitution of all the members. Five organizations that of indigenous local communities are being strengthened, and one organization that's joining us is that's promoting the new masculinity and promoting that gender equality. Let's go to the next slide, please. Very good. Now, our impact are pretty much those results and all those indicators that we currently have. Until where we're going, well, pretty much this is based pretty much on the flowchart that I recently presented, the last slide. But we have, as of right now, 922 people that have been built, and this is just one example. I'm not going to read all of them. In pretty much the legislation part, that more than 42% of that total are women. Also, we've trained technician technical government in fishing and agriculture, more than 217 women and 73 men for the gender business case. And if we can say and call that, yes, we are trying, we're attracting more women, but those women are also changing as well their reactions against the house, against their families. So this is the strategy, the gender strategy that we're aiming, and we've taken this to an action plan and inserted in our work plan. I think here comes the last slide. The next slide, please. What are we going to do? How are we going to perform? What are we going to do? Well, we will still continue working and supporting all of these organizations. We want to leave these five organizations, these five women organizations that currently are promoting new business with the focus in biodiversity, managing the ecosystem. Well, we just want to give them and take them to a level of empowerment of companies, etc. We want to take them high, always providing some models and training people with the support and help of agent, the gender and environment organizations, so that we can, well, we continue expanding and creating this awareness, and also with all the local governments and the local authorities that are focusing on all those natural resources. Just just mention all the support to the men in gender equality and also the empowerment and strengthening the women support, and something really important, promote the participation of the youth, because they are going to be a new generation, and this new generation definitely needs to have that focus, and that's the change that we are aiming and looking forward. Well, leave. That's what we want to leave with this project. And with this, I think I have no other flow slide. Soma, thank you very much for showing us this project and also this wonderful environment that has promoted and strengthened the corporation, the gender focus, right? We will definitely continue with our next expo presenter, that is Luis Gonzalez. But before, just want to remind everybody that's listening that we got a chat box where you can easily, well, include all your questions for the panelists, right? Now, I will now introduce Luis. Luis, he's he works in social with more than 16 years, working in links, fighting against, working for water and building and managing those risks, adapting to climate change, political ecology, and also political science. Luis is also part of the ecological science UNES in addressing the incidents in managing advocacy in public policy. He's also a member of the Alliance against the privatization of water and also the management and also the face against mining and also against the food sovereignty. Luis, go ahead, all yours. Good morning, Jackie. Good morning. Definitely, it's a great pleasure to be part of this webinar and also address the biodiversity situation linked in the gender-based violence. I definitely think that in Salvador we have a big humanitarian crisis that's definitely affecting all of us, especially the women. especially the women, because they have their vulnerable conditions that are highlighted and that pretty much are being reinforced because they historically they have charged in all the tasks of the house, right? So definitely this is a reality in El Salvador, that most of the environmental conflict are just the women that are there, that are helping, that are supporting. However, well, this work that women are doing for the care of the environment and also the population is not being reflected. It's not reflected that the men are on taking their reproductive uh, well, task in this part. This pretty much means that women are the ones that are doing all the tasks. Then we find super women that are taking and respecting, and they're in charge of the church, they're in charge of community support, the school, the family. And then they come to a point that they get so tired, drained of the amount of tasks that they get in their communities. That is why, on a certain period, UNES, that pretty much is, we're an organization that we're in charge of environmental part of focusing on a political ecology. We start to see and understand the necessity of including the gender part, but also aside from the gender part, in the new masculinities, how we were addressing this with the men and also with the leaders of the same communities. And well, this definitely has given and provided us positive results. Next slide, please. Well, as we can see, there's this big link between masculinities and also biodiversity conservation, and we definitely consider the importance of including masculinity to generate a support for gender equality in a safe way. Let's say that today, that the situation of taking care of the biodiversity in the scenarios, well, pretty much they all are link of men, that when back then we there was a well, economical resource in between. We were talking about protecting the mangroves, because of course there was some extra any type of extraction of or fish or shrimp in there. A group of fishers where the men were getting involved. But when you wanted to protect the mangrove because of water or because of that necessity of an adequate environment or a nice environment for the community, or to have or take care of any medical plants, the men were not involved, the women were there involved. So there's this new process of building a new masculinity with men, with the groups that we already had, with the groups that about protecting the mangroves. Here we're talking about groups. ACMA, Probosque, and Asprofema are groups that we're working historically in protecting those mangroves and activity of, well, protection and monitoring of the mangroves, the situation of reforestation of the mangroves, and doing those channels uh, in the mangroves so that there could be a very good circulation of the water. So all this work that we were doing with groups of men, and that back then they were all linked with their economical activity, because one way or another the mangrove is pretty much their the only access of economical income for the house. Other activities where women were involved, they were not helping. So there we find a necessity of creating this new masculinity. Trust me, it was a challenge in the area. There's this machismo, and also very high machismo, especially all those journeys where a few men that they were going in at the beginning, they didn't want to participate. There was pretty much this religious scenario, but little by little they were trying to change that, sensibilizing the population, the men, about what was this masculinity, why was this important, why understand their reproductive responsibility. It's something fundamental. And let's say that the groups were participating more amplified, and they were generating that awareness about this scenario. Next slide, please. In this sense, I believe and think that in this process of new masculinity, there was this empowerment about all the leadership. Let's say and talk that, just like we mentioned a few moments ago, historically, the women are the ones that are pretty much are protecting those environmental part. Just like with UNIS, we've been working this focus, this eco-feminist focus, and how all the women we can continue empowering about this protection and care of the environment. Of course, with all of this is to generate that space or generate those conditions so that we can all participate, so that they don't get drained. That is why it's important that all of them can assume other roles that historically women have participated. And all of this has been promoted the participation of all of them in some organization spaces, but also in the decision making part. How do they participate? What Sulma, I also mentioned this to Sulma and also the other organizations, but not just like secretaries, but also as president of those women organizations, sectors that are not only just taking notes, but know that they can also add value to the organization. So with this, without a doubt, there's been some steps, bigger step, but there's more participation of women, more impact from the women since when we started, since day one. There's a different participation from women today than the day since day one, right? Now this we can recognize how they take the microphone with our other organization, how all of them are leadering, how they express themselves in how they are part of any advocacy or they're part of the decision making, how they participate or being lobbyists with the mayors, with some senators. This is a great example how women are being empowered on this work of protecting the environmental areas. Next slide, please. So, yeah, part of this challenge is that men must assume their reproductive responsibility. Part of the work, again, of this new masculinity, this is create that sensibilization so that men can pretty much assume their reproductive and care responsibility in their home, which directly affects the level of women participation and time that women have in participating in organizational spaces. Because women can always do this, but this is we're trying to multiply we don't want to multiply the roles that they are taking. Aside from being in 5 or 6 spaces, and also it's just when men understand that their that reproductive responsibility, and also understand and has that awareness of their participation and the participation of women in decision making space organization part, well, we can say that he will also, or men will understand that they lead, and it will help women so that they can add value toward this environmental fight. That's it, pretty much all of us, we all participate. Something that the project has shown is that effectively women are those ones that are more actively understand and take this role and lead this role of protecting those environmental areas, because this is a care that for them is very linked to their families, to their community, to their sons, to the daughters. This guarantees the protection of all the territories without a doubt. As UNES, part of this organization, just like we mentioned, we see with great importance to add and include the protection and care of biodiversity, but with this gender focus, with this new masculinity role that is fundamental for life and biodiversity conservation in the same environment. Thank you. Luis, thank you very much for your presentation, where pretty much you are clearly showing us the importance of reducing that charge, that workload, that domestic workload, and the involvement of men in that reproductive part. We will continue now with our the last presentation, and the next exposer, his name is Alberto Blanco, that he is pretty much a former and masculine trainer and also a consultant in for more than 10 years, definitely. He's also a founder and member of the Nikilis. Probably always have a problem saying the name of the organization. That pretty much is that workshop of masculinity encounter in El Salvador. And also Alberto, he's also part of that masculinity workshops in the Latin America area, that network, that Rivas network. He has well studies in business administration, corporation, international corporation assistant, gender, feminist, and also like and public policy. Go ahead, Alberto. Thank you very much, Jackie, and greetings to everyone that's listening to all of us and the colleagues that have been part of this. Well, for me, definitely, this has been a great pleasure to participate in this process of building this didactic manual of the facilitator, especially about masculinity is not violent in fishing context. sustainable in the Central American area. That pretty much is the long name that we've giving to that we will see now. Pretty much it's pretty much the areas that we are being built from the same experience, and also the validation of men that have participated in different stages of different locations that we've seen. We've seen some areas, we've had some workshops in Honduras, just like in the area of coastal part of Omoa, La Mosquita bordering Nicaragua, and also Aguachapan South with St. Eunice. The whole idea of this process that we've had is pretty much just to build an instrument that can facilitate and also that can be scaled up so that men, fishers, especially fishers, or that are working in coastal areas, and pretty much that USCM are working and their members in each of the territories can implement and they can also develop in local levels. As a matter of fact, we have here in this flow chart three different groups of colleagues that have been part of the different process of each city. Next slide, please. Well, since we started this process, we identify like four step of the manual creation process of masculinity. The first step is pretty much was a diagnostic part where pretty much we had a literary review, instruments, interviews, and face-to-face workshops. In this stage, well, pretty much we identify the main characteristics of the model of each of the territories where we were performing and developing this manual. The next stage pretty much was the construction of each manual that this meant to identify a theory of change, identify those objectives, design that methodology, and also structure the manual. The manual is built from three big steps. The first one is pretty much the manual validation. That is pretty much shows us the steps of how we are going to be implementing one part that is explaining, that is incorporating all the techniques, all those dynamics, right? That of those formation process. And the third part was pretty much one that is including a revision, a theoretical and a bibliography revision about all the revision about masculinity and gender. The next step was pretty much to validate that manual. We had the manual, and we went to these three spaces to identify if the manual was working in the territory, if it was accepted by our colleagues in each place, in each city, and also this was the great opportunity to modify and also include and add or add some things on the manuals that can be better, or well, that can potentially could be in very good for the formation process, right? Finally, we created, starting from this process, something that we called the impulse training. It was a group of men committed on promoting the masculinity project in each of these areas. This is how we created promoters in Aguachapan, in the south of Aguachapan, in El Salvador, with the UNES, in La Mosquitia, with Mopawi, and Omoa with CCO, with working with the conservation project with for peace. This is how we build the manual. And as a matter of fact, today, what less than a few weeks ago, we had the chance to work in the fifth stage. That pretty much is to prepare those replicas, those replicas that of all the people that have been part in those formation process, and that we will follow up and work together, and that pretty much will become a way of performing on all the men that participate, just like those men in the privileged part. Next slide, please. What have been those key points that we consider key for the development of this manual? First of all, we mentioned what could be the the learning experience to develop the masculinity techniques. The first principle that we included was the experimental learning. What we mean is that this process is basic for masculinity to start them. These are process not only theoretical, but also they need to be some process that men can also connect with their own realities, with their life, with their stories, with their personal stories, and like those spaces where they can perform that economical activities and they can develop those community spaces, social and family one. And well, due to this, these lessons learned can allow us to that the men can understand the masculinity, the violence, the gender based, the inequalities, and also the use of all the goods, etc. They can understand how they are all connected with the daily basis. And well, this is how we can avoid that external people can try to take external ideas, and that is why most of the time in they're not developed. Those areas are those ideas are not developed by the same local people. The second principle we call it popular education, which we means is just uh, a problematic one, and that also this will come from the personal evidence. What we mean is that we're not taking sample from outside. The examples are pretty much coming from the same experience from the same people that are participating in those workshops. And when all of those experiences are shared, all those scenarios are shared, well, this generates an auto collective learning from all the main groups that are participating in the formation process. A third principle that we included was the active listening. What is active listening? Which pretty much is a process where the men we learn how to listen most of the time. In all of these dynamics, men, we don't listen. We hear someone is talking to us. We see that the lips are moving. We listen. We hear some sound, but we truly don't listen what they are telling us. So now, teaching them how to hear on a different point of view, under put ourselves in their place, generate that empathy, and also connect on a more deeper level between the same men and also men against well men with women. The last process that we include was progress. Progress is pretty much just going from the essential until going to the general part. What we mean is pretty much building and rebuilding a process that can allow us to have a gradual approach for all the men that can participate and also criticize and talk about masculinity, non-violent masculinity in their community backgrounds. The second key point that we are explaining in the manual, we call it analysis of analysis from the self. Well, this is pretty much a process where we ask the colleagues that are participating in the masculinity process that they can talk and explain and start talking about from their point of view, right? That they can key understand from what we are talking about. It's pretty much explain us a point of view of an understanding of the masculinity process. The last key element that I'm explaining is pretty much the dynamics and the techniques. Over here, we believe fundamentally, we truly believe that the formation doesn't need to be boring, but this does not mean that this can be reflective or problematic and can question. What we mean is pretty much the process. This is a true evidence, but also at the same time takes all the reflection parts, the problematic parts, and also the understanding of personal understanding of the same understanding. Next slide, please. How we have structure. What's the structure of the manual? Well, at the end of the validation process, we concluded that we were going to establish 5 modules. The first module is pretty much an introduction to the process, where pretty much we call it the creation of a safe space. This means that this first encounter between the parts that are facilitating and are participating in masculinity process can generate a trust environment and also an environment that the people can express themselves freely, open, and honestly about anything that they want to express. It's all welcome. This does not mean that this can't come to a debate. As a matter of fact, no, this is part of the masculinity process that we understand is making sure that everything that we're talking about this masculinity process is in debate. but we need to guarantee that this debate needs to be a safe space where the colleagues that are participated can feel a total freedom. A total freedom. The second model that we call social construction of male identity is pretty much just to identify what has been that process, that social process, that pretty much the men we have built, that identity has been gradually, well, based on historical events and current events that are changing, and through time and through culture that has changed it. But of course, this is pretty much it puts a model, a general model with some particularities in each of the spaces that's being developed. Model three, pretty much we talking about hegemonic and masculinity in practice. How do we develop this masculinity in this social construction in a daily basis, identifying the violence that we are exercising, the violence that the men have suffered, and also the violence that, well, has been not only for women but also to other men. This particularity of the practice is pretty much to find, as a matter of fact, how do we exercise as participants, how do I live the masculinity part on a daily basis, but also emphasize on all the people in on my background, how do they live or other men are living the masculinity, the hegemonic, the fourth model. We call this a cost and consequences of the hegemonic masculinity, how this is affecting me, how this is affecting society, and how this is affecting women, how this is affecting the environment, and all the practice of the masculinity, starting from all the particular experience from each participant. And the last model that we have is pretty much we call alternative and transformative commitments from the perspective of masculinity. Pretty much is where can we find a path to fix and correct the exercise of power, the exercise of violence, and all this bad practice that pretty much are being created due to the masculinity. And well, it's also a part of generating a hope that the change is possible and that change can definitely be done in a short period, in a medium period, and not fall in that desperation. We start from the idea that all of this process don't need to be, well, a problem, but also they need to come and bring a responsibility, because the shame is a problem but the responsibility moves us. So we need to start from that point, that fundamental idea for this manual. Next slide, please. Well, now we pretty much reached the part of progress. So, how much we've progressed in this process? Well, we validated the manual of 41 men on three different sites. We also created we trained the team with 38 men. We also decrease that the resistance to masculinity process, which leads in most of the places, just like the Mosquitia, for example, in Omoa, and recently in Guatemala, in the area of Izabal, and also in the area of Puerto Barrios and Livingstone. They never, most of them, as a matter of fact, most of them, they didn't receive the masculinity process, and this has led us to change that resistance and also generate those positive experience about the topic of masculinity, and also definitely has helped us to, well, that the men can, well, start working. And finally, well, the replicas, like I was sharing, that the third week of October we were working and we're coming back, so that the first group, the first promoter that will perform these replicas, we will follow this process in Omoa together with CCO. So this is another progress that we have, where pretty much the men that have participated in this process can also generate these replicas on a local level and empower on the masculinity part. And the last slide, please. This is pretty much where we talk about the challenges. The challenges are pretty much explaining where are we and what are we missing. First of all, we need to design a roadmap for further progress, which pretty much means that all of this is doing a masculinity process. We say that in my collective, in the Kamalikilis project, just like Jackie was mentioning, this is not like a washing machine. We just don't go. We're not like putting men in washing machines and then we put them clean outside of the society. No, what we're generating is pretty much it's just that awareness. No, we have to go deep with that awareness. We have to keep that awareness. We have to count and consider with work with across our masculinity process. This is not a guarantee. We need to continue sustaining. We need to go deep on so that all of this process can be sustainable. The second challenge that we are including is support the implementation of that basic manner on a local level, like we mentioned we are doing. That's what we are trying to do with the situation of all the replicas. And as a matter of fact, this is a challenge that all of this can have more replicas in all the areas that only says working. The third challenge that we are explaining is pretty much support all those commitments of the implementing partners in the area of masculinity. This is something that for me, I'm happy that all the society initially on some of the cases have once they have their doubts, but once they pass this process, they perform with high commitments and they will continue with the masculinity formation. So yeah, that's our goal. Have that commitment from all the members to go deep. The fourth challenge is pretty much generate resources for the practical and theoretical deepening of more advanced level. This is pretty much a basic manual. This is a basic process that pretty much is part of nine evaluation. We'll have like around 36 hours of work, but this is a basic level. We need to go deep. We need to start working more, and while we go deep, we will also continue with building and having more allies, more stakeholders in those areas, in the territories, allies that are looking for building a better non-violent culture. And the last challenge, of course, is pretty much continue with that evaluation and adjust what we need to adjust in the masculinity development. And now they gave me another last slide that pretty much is just an announcement that the masculinity manual will now be available next week in Spanish, and soon we will have a translation for English. But there it is. We've seen it. We've seen this with Jackie, almost complete, about to finish. So next week, we hope that this can be available. This is a manual that will include, like we mentioned, three big parts. One of these parts is a first step. Second part is all the techniques that are used during this process, and the third part is pretty much that legal framework and conceptual framework. We're happy, we're excited that finally we will have we're close we're close of having the manual in our hands, navigating in our masculinity. That's it on my end. Thank you very much. No, thank you very much, Alberto. Definitely, I just want to highlight that we are well we don't have no more time. We have a couple of questions. Let's read them from. Let me see. I like, if possible, the more 100 people that are with us, that we will do one, at least one question, and at least continue, right? And if we see the question that are being done, most of them are focused in how have you guys performed, or how have you guys done that men can participate, right? Truly, and that you can take control of those reproductive tasks, that same reduction, that you guys don't feel task reduction, how has that helped to reduce that violence? And that's pretty much the only question that I'm going to explain and put over here to the panel. And yeah, I just wanted to know and give the chance to one or two of the people that can answer any in less than 1 minute if possible, so that we can respect time and continue. And I don't know who would like to answer the question. If no, I can point and say who can answer the question. Alberto or Luis, can you share and tell us any tips or any feedback? Go ahead. Thank you, Jackie. Well, pretty much, I think we need to say something that most of the men, those men that we work in the protection areas of biodiversity, operates with men that are not that sensible about the environmental. They're aware that there's a problematic that it's affecting their community, but the gender part, the masculinity part, is something that they were not even considering. Probably at the beginning they had a resistance because they were not aware of how was this, or so initially, pretty much just invite them to consider. This is key. This is something that Alberto has mentioned because there was a working team, some leaders that has more trust, that we've been working, performing a little bit more aside from the project, and just ask them if they can invite other colleagues that are linked with taking care of the mangroves and biodiversity. So we truly believe that this is element, this is important, how the gender and also new masculinity are part and linked to the protection of the environment, managing this like it is, just like of the protection of the magnitude of all the crisis and the climate change and the loss of all the mangroves. This definitely helped a lot how to create that awareness to involve and to work together in those new masculinities. But I don't know if Adalberto has another opinion. This is pretty much my opinion. Thank you, Luis. Thank you, Luis. Thank you, Jackie. Well, I think it's key. Stick to understand their personal experience. This is a starting point. This will help that people can understand and see the inequality issue and also the management of power for masculinity as something from outside. It's pretty much on the other leader, understand how my neighbor, and then when they see the municipality, they have to see this, understand that this is something that I have to control, and it's my responsibility to work and perform this. And before seeing the neighbor, it's important that they need to connect to the reality. And this is fundamental and key so that men can participate more and keep themselves in the process of promoting all of these constructions of nonviolent masculinity. Thank you. Thank you very much, Alberto, and also Luis, for your answers. Now I will now go to Pam so that we can continue with the close up of this webinar.
Great. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for a really rich discussion today. I'm aware that we're out of time, so I don't want to take too much time, but just a couple of closing thoughts from me. And first, thanks everyone to Zulma and Luis and Alberto for really showing us those highlights from your projects. To Luis for the opening remarks, and to Jamie and Jackie for the facilitation for this webinar. I just wanted to make a reflection or two from the perspective of the Commission on Ecosystem Management, which I have been part of, and we were very happy to be part of this webinar. Because what we do is try to focus on incorporation of ecosystem-based approaches. And one of the key tenets of our commission then is to really think about systems and to think about holistic approaches to ecosystems. And I think what the speakers today have all really demonstrated extremely well is that focusing on whole communities and whole households is part of that holism, right? That addressing gender issues is not just an add-on to conservation projects to, check a box, but rather it's something really fundamental. It's something fundamental to understanding successes and failures, to understanding cultural practices around conservation. It's fundamental to achieving the integration of people and nature that we know that we need moving forward. And I think what we saw today is that in particular, focusing on men and boys and addressing concepts of masculinities is absolutely crucial. And that really fits in with the work that we've been trying to do in one of the thematic groups of SIM, which is on cultural practices. And what we have talked about in our group and what we heard about today is this idea that gender is not just about women, and gender is often about issues of power and social constructions of masculinity, which then in turn become really crucial to understanding all sorts of other interactions. So it's like at the core of what we're doing rather than the sort of add-on. And the work of these projects is really helping us to see that. So I just want to send my congratulations again to the Regional Coastal Biodiversity Project and the participants. And I want to hear more because you're having so many successes. This manual will be great. I'd love to think about how we can take that manual to so many of the projects on nature-based solutions that are popping up, right, as our new sort of popular term. Where does GBV prevention fit into those? The sort of anticipatory work that Alberto has really been talking about, that takes time. How do we do that in light of pressures of environmental change, in situations of disasters, like we're seeing in Puerto Rico right now with the hurricane that just hit, right? We know that gender-based violence is often a consequence of environmental changes like hurricanes and disasters. What can we take from the lessons that we've learned from these projects and be anticipatory to those changes? I think we've seen a lot of potential here, and I want to kind of see where we can take it next. So thank you again to everybody who was able to show us some of those really innovative strategies. So I think the next slide is we have a poll. We'd like to see all of the participants today, and apologies for running over just a bit, but we wanted to hear what people learned today. How would you rate your current knowledge of how or why to address masculinities, gender-based violence, and biodiversity conservation linkages now that you've heard our webinar? So the poll is asking you, do you feel like you're not knowledgeable, somewhat knowledgeable, and you know where to find practical info? You're very knowledgeable and are going to be able to address them in your work. You're extremely knowledgeable and you can be a source for others. Let's see if any of these categories have changed through the course of the webinar as we've learned more about these projects and approaches. So maybe we'll give it another minute or two to let people take the poll, and we'll be able to see what impact our speakers today have potentially been able to have. So hopefully the poll results are coming in. And once we get those, hopefully those can be shared. Great, so we're definitely, I see a huge drop in not being knowledgeable. So kudos to our panel. We've had a big impact on some of our participants. So I love to see that, that big jump in people who said that they weren't knowledgeable are now somewhat knowledgeable, and some of the people who said they were somewhat knowledgeable, I think, are now knowing where to find more practical info, and some are even feeling extremely knowledgeable. So I'm really proud of that result. That's fantastic. And we have one last poll, and we want to know if this webinar was helpful in raising awareness on how we can address masculinities, gender-based violence, and biodiversity conservation. So just let us know a quick yes or no if this webinar was helpful. This has been a really useful one for me, and I hope it has been for others. And we can take this information and think about future webinars that we might want to design and implement. So as soon as we get that results, we'll be able to wrap up our webinar. Great. Well, we're wonderful. That's wonderful to hear that this webinar has been helpful to so many of you. So that's really encouraging. And I think it indicates there's going to be a big audience for that manual when it comes out. And hopefully we'll be able to spread to other areas as well. So I'm going to hand back over to Jamie to close us out. And thank you again for everybody who's participated. It's been really a wonderful experience.
Thank you so much, Pamela. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending this event. We really hope it was useful for you. We will send the recording and the link to the Spanish Masculinities Manual next week as a part of our GBV-ENV Center Bulletin, and the translation of that manual will follow in the weeks to come. We had a lot of amazing questions from all of you that we didn't have time to address. So we'll also try our best to include a FAQ in that mailing as well. And we invite you to please contact us for any feedback or any requests for support or materials. And we want to thank, again, our wonderful team, our amazing speakers, and wish you a great day. Thank you.